This episode is brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is the #1 tool for all podcasters. You can record high-fidelity audio between remote locations and get studio-quality sound. Go to Zencastr.com and use coupon code THATENTERTAINS for 20% off for 3 months or 20% off an annual plan.
This is a That's Entertainment podcast.
Awesome.
Just tell people they're awesome and mean it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?
Awesome. That was awesome. You guys are awesome.
No,
You're awesome.
no.
You are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I am your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. Before we get to this week's guest, I just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone who listens to this show. You've taken time out of your day where you could be doing anything else, and you're spending it with me and my guest. If you're looking for some great ways to help support Everything is Awesome, head on over to patreon.com/thatentertains. There, you can subscribe to That's Entertainment Podcast Network and get early access to Everything is Awesome, Bullies Keep Out, The Ladies Who Rant, and more. We also have exclusive content that can't be found anywhere else. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those who are supporting us on Patreon. Without them, we wouldn't be able to produce all the content that we do. Michael D'Angelo, thank you. If you'd like to be like Mike and support us on Patreon, head on over to patreon.com/thatentertains. If you want to support us in a non-monetary way, head over to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. The more of those we get, the more ears we get in front of. Or word-of-mouth recommendations are another great way to spread the good word of awesome. This week, I sit down with the founder of Temple of Geek, Danniel Slade. What a badass last name, right, guys? We chat about old technology, James Gunn, Chris Hardwick, and, of course, Temple of Geek, amongst a whole slew of other things. Without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Mr. Danniel Slade right here on awesomepodcast.com and thatentertains.com/network. I don't know how it's going to work when it comes to the time frame of us posting, but in real life, I have just guested on your show, and now you're here. So this is like a true crossover, where and I must say, I apologize to both my listeners and our guests from last week. I think it's last week's guest. Everything is Awesome. The other Everything is Awesome podcast, where I did not clear with them how we were recording our crossover, so that I haven't edited it yet, so I don't even know how that sounds, guys. But Danniel and I, we were smart about it, and we talked a little bit. Yeah. I gotta say, I'm super impressed with and you said you mentioned it was new, but the professional, like, pre-interview almost that we had.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's something I saw. I was like, it's something we need to do because, we started recording podcasts. Sometimes I'd just be like, hey, guys, let's get on the radio and let's start recording. And what are we talking about? I don't know. We'll figure it out as we go. And, I was like, we're going to start having guests on. We need to probably be a little bit more prepared. So,
and it's funny. I'm the opposite. Excuse me. I don't prepare at all. Even for my own show. Like, I made the joke on your show where I was like, oh man, I'm glad I don't have to prepare anything. And literally I don't prepare anything for this either. Like, and it's for the first time. My fiance called me out on it. She's like, and she doesn't listen to my show at all. She's just started listening to podcasts in 2018, and it was to listen to My Favorite Murder. And I was like, oh my God, you're listening to that? I'll listen to it so we can talk about it. And she's like, I don't want to talk to you. Just don't listen to it. And I listen to it so we can talk about it, but she doesn't listen to my show at all.
She doesn't listen to your show.
No. It's as I told you on your show, I'm like a third-rate Kevin Smith, and and here's the best part. I don't know how we never really clarified how deep you go into Kevin Smith. That sounded way dirtier than I meant it to, but you can answer that in a second. Not only is his name Kevin, and he does a bunch of podcasts, and he does film. I'm Kevin. I do a bunch of podcasts, or did at one point, and I have an interest in film. Like, I would love to record. Like, I would love to direct one day. his wife is Jen, and my fiance is Jen. So it's a real like I'm literally a Smith away from being Kevin Smith.
Legally get your name changed.
All right, kids, your guys are going to change your last name to Smith as well. By the way, fiance Jen, we are going to now be the Smiths, not the future Gallaghers.
Make sure you name your daughter Harley. Harley Quinn, to be exact.
It's my fiance is way not into allowing that kind of bull crap to happen. It's my son is named he's named after me. He's the third, but we call him Trey because I refuse to have another Kevin Gallagher in the house. I grew up as a junior, so it's especially as the child gets older, it can get confusing when it comes to mail and phone calls and stuff like that. Maybe that's I guess technically I'm a millennial, but I like to say zennial. I'm in between that Gen Xer and millennial phase. But maybe that's just like maybe that's an issue of like yesteryear, like because everyone has their own, even kids have their own cell phones. So like I don't have a house phone.
What are you talking about? Babies come out with cell phones nowadays.
But I mean, that was, I don't know like how it was when you were growing up, but like, you know,
I had the freaking 40-foot long cord that we ran from the hallway into my bedroom, and my parents would trip over it and be like, "What the hell?" And I'm like, "Dude, I'm on the phone."
Like for me, and I guess there's even a problem when you don't have the same name. But like if someone calls on a house phone, because like that's essentially like a crappy version of talking. It's like that's like it's almost like the Skype. Like if you're going to analog it to anything, it's kind of like the Skype of traditional phone calls, where cell phones is like the 4K version of phone calls. But you could tell, like, it was harder to tell who you were talking to on those landlines. And I guess even like in a household where you don't have the same name, like if someone, like a lot of times someone would call and they'd be like, "Hey, what's up?" Like they wouldn't even ask for the person they wanted to talk to. They just like, "Hey, what's up?" They just assume it was my dad.
You remember, we actually recognized voices back then. I mean, we actually learned phone numbers, and then we knew who the person sounded like on the phone when we called.
Yeah, well, I can attest to definitely knowing phone numbers back then. And this might be because I'm tone deaf, that depending on the person, I would maybe think that it was someone else. And to this day, that's the issue too. And then maybe that's beyond being tone deaf, but like, I only have a handful of phone numbers memorized, whereas 15 years ago when, I maybe had a cell phone, probably
one
not
of them little tiny blue Nokias. Or I guess it would be a giant brick Nokia.
My first cell phone I got when I was 15, only because I had a job, and it was had to be the first flip phone, because it literally, if you had it closed and you put it on its back, it looked like a toy tank. It was huge. It was before the small phones. So I'm 34. So almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago, I had my first cell phone. And it was basically like the portable version of a car phone.
So I was 20. So yeah, I guess that's about the same year, because I'm 39.
Okay.
So I had one of them giant Nokia. Well, I keep saying it was giant. It was probably about the length of my freaking hand.
Yeah.
From fingertip to palm. It was a black Nokia. I don't even remember the model of it, with the green screen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Try to keep that in your back pocket.
Yeah, and it was, I would say, like, let me pull it up now. I have an iPhone 8 Plus. Yeah, Plus. So like, I venture to say, if I'm picturing the Nokia that you had correctly, my phone is physically bigger, but not as bulky.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think it's the bulk that was the problem, not really the size of it.
Yeah. It is amazing to, like, that wasn't so long ago, like 20 years ago, well, like round it up, to go from like those brick phones to literally a computer that's probably definitely more powerful than the computers I used in high school.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely more powerful than the computer that took man to the moon.
Yeah, yeah. I went. There was what was I read an article somewhere where, and this, I mean, it's not a recent article, but some, I think it was a government agency, was using like 400 PlayStation 3s to like run something, because that's how, like, it was cheaper and more powerful than like,
I remember seeing something about that.
yeah. Like, I mean, I don't know. That doesn't really have anything to do with anything except for computers and whatnot. But yeah, that's crazy that like that you
It
can.
was some foreign government, I think.
Was it a foreign government? Yeah, I don't. I mean, listen, I'm not prepared to talk about anything. It's so for those listening, it's. I don't. Do you ever fall into, because you're old enough to like remember when radio was radio and there was no podcast. So as a podcaster, do you ever fall into like radio tropes where, and this is my big one, where I say, if you're just tuning in, like no one's just tuning into the middle of a podcast.
No, I don't. I try not to. I think I did at the very beginning. And I'm like, welcome, trying to make my voice all fancy and stuff like the radio people and I'm just like, that sounds so stupid.
Oh God, wait until you listen to every intro I do. It's I go way over. It's last year I recorded a special for the 10-year anniversary of me doing podcasting, and I sat down with my old producer and talked, and like, he's known me obviously for 10 years. He was my first producer, so he's known me at minimum of 10 years, longer because we go back before podcasting, and so we were sitting down talking, just normal conversation, probably not much different than what you and I are doing now. And then that was at the time where I was doing intros live during the show. I was and then adding an intro to it as well. And so we're sitting there talking, and then he's like, all right, like, we're good to record. I'm like, all right, welcome to this week's edition of everything. And I do that hack radio intro.
This is the Temple of Geek podcast. Yeah, I mean, I used to do that, and it's just, I don't know. I don't do that anymore, as you could tell.
Yeah. Well, see, I think there's a lot of things that I just kind of refuse to adapt to when it comes to podcasting. And I think part of that is having been doing it for basically like maybe a year after, like, podcasting by name has been around for about 12, maybe 13 years. Obviously before that, webcasting was the thing. Every radio show, at least in Philly, prior to podcast being a term, you were able to go listen to commercial free versions of the DJs in a webcast that you could download to your computer. It would take an hour to download, but you could download it.
Sometimes more.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, digital audio, listening on your computer, now your smartphone, has been around, I want to say, almost since as long as the internet, probably in some fashion it has been. But I remember like the early days of the big radio station for us in Philly was YSP. And that was the station that aired Howard Stern and eventually turned into an all talk station and stuff like that. And before, I want to say 2006 is when the term podcast is officially recognized. So like in the early 2000s, you could download a radio show.
Yeah, we started in 2012, so it was about 6 years after that. I only listened to like Kevin Smith's podcast at the time, not Babylon. What was the other one? Smodcast.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, that actually sounds fun. I wonder if I can do that.
Well, perfect. Okay, so this is you're doing the show for me. You kind of led into where I wanted to go. So
wait, you had a plan?
There is a plan. There's a plan that I don't share with anybody. And we had the benefit of talking for an hour or so prior to doing this show here. So, but I do usually have a plan, and I like to get the person's origin point, and you have a couple origin points that we can probably touch on, because Temple of Geeks, which is you run Temple of Geeks, both the podcast and the site, correct?
That's correct.
So we can touch on a couple of different things when it comes to TOG, if you will. I like the acronym TOG. But so your origin point with podcasting is 2012, Kevin Smith. Does it go before that at all? Like, when did you start listening to Smodcast?
So I've probably listened to Smodcast probably about a year before that all happened. And one day, my friend and I, we would have these great long philosophical debates until 3:00 in the morning in our garage while drinking beer, as all philosophical debates are.
Of course.
And, one day I was like, dude, have you ever heard of the Smodcast? And I started talking to him about the podcast. I was like, we should try that. It's so simple. All we have to do is just record ourselves talking. So we were like, well, what the hell are we going to talk about? So we went back and forth, and finally we were like, we need to do a movie review. Let's just do a whole movie review. We'll record it, see how it turns out. So we ended up watching Batman Under the Red Hood.
That's a phenomenal film.
Yeah, it was actually really good. I mean, I've seen it like prior to that, but I watched it again and was taking notes and trying to be all like professional about it. And then we recorded, and it sounded like crap. I have the original 33 episodes of the Temple of Geek podcast. I will probably put those back up on the site at some point. But yeah, man, it was just pure crap. And then we were like, well, let's do it again, because this was awesome. And next week we did it. We kept doing it.
Well, everyone's first episode, I talk from plenty of experience, because I've had a lot of first episodes. In the 11 years I've been podcasting, I've developed and been part of more like probably 13 to 15 different shows. So I have a lot of first episodes, and everyone's like, I was surprised when I had issues first starting to do Everything Is Awesome, because like at that point I was like 8 years in. I was like, all right, I'm an expert at podcasting now, so like I should have zero issues. And like it was issue after issue for the first 10 weeks. Like I believe episode 10 was called Celebrating Failure. And it was from like episode 10 on that I started getting my shit together. But yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument that I've heard plenty of people say, like, yeah, I remove after I get good at doing podcasting, I remove the first couple episodes because they sound like dog shit. And if people start from the beginning, I don't want that to be the first like inclination of what we are. But my argument against that is like, I think in 2018, like people understand what a podcast is, and that like when you first start out, you got to learn. So,
yes.
so if they start off with something that sounds good, they're going to expect something better. So maybe this is me being lazy. Maybe it's me trying to set the bar real low, but I'm happy that I have stuff that doesn't sound so great, because it's part of my mythology at this point.
Mine so much wasn't getting rid of it because it was horrible, but it was because we went from whatever hosting site we were on, I don't even remember, it was like Podomatic or something like that, to actually starting our own website. And when we started the website, we relaunched the Temple of Geek podcast into the Toddcast, like I mentioned on the episode that we recorded prior to this. And we started over with episode number 1 and went it from that way. And all that is hosted on my site now. We no longer host anything on a external site.
Well, and that's, I think, a super valid reason to not necessarily have it on your feed anymore. Like I don't have any of my original stuff up anywhere anymore, because I have switched. Now, I've always done self-hosting, because that's 11 years ago, that's the only way I knew how to do it, was to self-host. And I've never gone to like Libsyn or Blueberry. I mean, I use Blueberry to publish on the website, but everything's hosted, self-hosted. But I've switched servers multiple times since then. I took a 4-year break at some point. So like me also saying I've been podcasting for 11 years is kind of a sham. Like it's 11 years because that's how math works.
It's 11 years since I started.
Yes. But
consecutively, however,
yeah, it is a sham consecutively, but math is math. You can't, I mean, no matter what schools are trying to do with math being different now, like 11, the math checks out to 11 years. So yeah, I don't know. Where'd we go? Why did I go on this math tangent? Oh yeah, that's why I don't have my original shows. And, but yeah, I absolutely love the idea of when a podcast does something like that, when they, for whatever the reason is, starting a brand new show, renumbering and kind of rebranding or whatever, digging into that old library, because, and I think this is maybe more of the Kevin Smith in me than it is like the person that knows how to market and brand. Because I tend to, as I promoted on your show, I kind of put more focus on my personal Twitter handle than I did on the show Twitter handle, because I kind of brand myself as a person versus as like, oh yeah, listen to my podcast. It's more about like, listen to me. But I think those old episodes are part, like I try to every now and then maybe put some clips in, like if I do not necessarily a clip show, but that 10-year anniversary show, I threw some clips in because it was like the perfect time to do so. And I don't know. I think especially if like you're like, if Daniel is the part of Toddcast or the Temple of Geek cast that is the consistent, then like your listenership knows you now. And like, that's a cool part of your mythos is that first 33 episodes.
Yeah, I will probably put it back up one day, but sadly, a lot of it's dated material because a lot of our episodes in the very beginning were, just, hey, check out this awesome movie. Star Wars just came out. Let's talk about that for 17 episodes. So, a lot of that stuff is dated, but I would still release it just to kind of show you where we were. The guy I started with, he's off getting married, doing things now. He doesn't really do too much. He comes back and writes an article probably for me once a year. So, the original people that started it is no longer there. It's just me. Mm-hmm. I now have a brand new, all new crew that work for me, and they're phenomenal. They do all sorts of things. And I had several people come on the show with me, and, we've done the show since then, but those original episodes, they hold a special place because it was when I first started learning how to do everything.
Yeah. And that's what I love. I mean, like, for me, going back 10, 11 years, especially is like I would say like anything that's pre everything is awesome. I'm kind of selective of what I do share because, and this kind of falls in line with like the recent events with James Gunn. Like 10, 11 years ago, I was a completely different person. And I was not the greatest humorist. I did provocative humor. I also grew up in a time where like, okay, if I'm going to do a podcast, like, the closest thing to that is a radio show. And, like I listened to Stern. I listened to Kid Chris, who was like the Philly version of Stern. So like, I listened to all these shock jock radio. So like, I'm not necessarily happy with the type of humor I did 10, 11 years ago. And so I am kind of selective of what I bring over from that time frame, because while I believe in those mythos and my mythology and all that stuff brought me to what this episode that I'm doing with Daniel from Temple of Geeks and the person I am right now today, I also realize that there's humor in those episodes that probably isn't actually humor, especially in 2018. And there's zero reason for me to A, paint myself as an asshole, and B, have humor out there that might hurt somebody, and again, it's not even humor. Like it's tasteless attempts at humor.
We've all had those.
Yeah, and that's like, okay, so before we go more into you and Temple of Geek, where do you fall on the whole James Gunn of it all?
I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, it was 10 years ago. I was having a conversation with one of my other group members about this. It's like, it seems like the idea of someone having a personal life outside of the job and being able to say what they want to say has gone out the window. You have all, we talked a little bit about toxic fandom earlier. Mm-hmm. You have all these anonymous people who are just spouting crap off, some of the worst crap you've ever seen in your life. But you have someone that's in a public figure. They say one thing and they're gone. I mean, career's ruined. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I feel bad for James Gunn. It's happening so much now. It's becoming the norm. So, I mean, it honestly didn't really faze me.
Mark Badarnin. Mark Badarnin. Am I saying his last name right?
Mark Bernardin.
I think I got it right. Mark, the other guy on Fat Man on Batman with Kevin Smith. He's I mean, just a funny dude. I can't imagine anyone listening to this episode doesn't know who he is. but he published an article yesterday, maybe for the Hollywood
In the
Reporter.
Hollywood Journal, yeah.
Oh yeah, the Hollywood Journal.
No, I think it's the Reporter. You're right.
Okay. God damn. It's maybe second guess myself. But yeah, he published an article there about it, and it like that. I read that, and it helped me figure out what side of the fence I was on, because I was looking at it as from three different directions. The guy who blasted Chris Hardwick on social media because of what came out about him with Chloe Dykstra. As I looked at it from the angle of someone who, quote unquote, runs an entertainment company, for whatever that means to a what is essentially an expensive hobby, and then also from the side of it as someone who 10 to 11 years ago didn't maybe say that type of humor on social media, but I know there's probably things out there that like, God, what would someone find 10 years ago in my social media feed? And more importantly, not more importantly, but equally as importantly, like I know what I said, like, just in what I thought was a casual, like not serious conversation. And we were just goofing off and having fun. I looked at it from all three angles, and like, and this isn't an excuse at all, and it doesn't make it right, but like 10, 11 years ago, the world was very different and humor was perceived differently. So, I mean, there's a reason no one called him out for it 11 years ago. And it wasn't because he wasn't a nobody. He was a nobody. Like James Gunn 10 years ago is still making art and still directing films.
Scooby-Doo, man.
Yeah. So like, it's that's like an issue too. Like if you just look at it from that very basic, like, mindset is like, well, how come he didn't get called out 10 years ago for this? And it's because 10 years ago, no one batted an eye at it. And that does not make it right at all. And I wrote an article after reading Mark's article, and I kind of reiterated some of the things that he said. And I think that like what sums it up perfectly is that like, yes, James Gunn was an asshole. We were all assholes 10 years ago. And I would say, I venture to guess in 10 years from now, I'll say, man, I was an asshole 10 years ago. Because you're just progressively maturing and finding, like fine tuning who you are as a person. And yeah, he has there's the argument that he was in his 40s 10 years ago, but I don't know how much that necessarily matters. Because he's in Hollywood, I guess, is that he could use that excuse, like they're all immature. But I
was doing a lot of blow back then.
I think that like the fact that he was that person, and that by all accounts he is a different person, and he is someone who generally is considered a nice guy and stands up for the underprivileged, the undervoiced. I don't know. And it's I think if you take all the politics that come from it out of it, and that's kind of like what people have been saying is the reasoning behind all this. Disney definitely, in my opinion, should not have fired him. I understand why they did. I do understand it. But I just don't
agree too. They went too far. A lot of these companies I feel are going too far with a lot of this stuff. You brought up Chris Hardwick. Just recently, AMC did an investigation. Didn't find any fault, so they reinstated him. Where's to do justice? I guess is my thing. Everybody's guilty before there's a trial. I mean, I know that there's probably not going to be a trial for a lot of this stuff, but you get what I'm saying? It's just like we used to be innocent until proven guilty, and it's the exact opposite now. Someone can just say one little thing about you, and your whole life can be ruined, and it may not be the truth.
Yes. And see, and this is, it's hard to, I can't even talk because it's so hard to kind of know where I am when it comes to that, because innocent until proven guilty, definitely when it comes to justice and stuff. But when it comes to, I think the public opinion, I think I do stand on the side of, opinions. It doesn't matter what the justice, if you're innocent until proven guilty. I think you have as a person, I have every right to have the opinion of, I think you're guilty.
I agree with that. You're fine with having your opinion, but it's these people's opinions that are ruining these other people's careers.
Yes.
Just because the mass population feels that this guy did something wrong, now his career is ruined, and he may have not even done anything wrong because there has been nothing to show what evidence. There has been no evidence put forward, or an investigation put forward, or anything like that. So that's why I was happy to see that AMC did something. I don't know what they did, but they got some legal firm in, and they did some sort of investigation, and they felt that they were able to reinstate him.
So I'm going to give the flip argument to this because some backstory is that one of the shows that I used to host, and it's still listed as a network show because it's still it was around in this new generation of Kev, and I plan on bringing it back within the next year. But I used to do this show called the Zomcast. It was originally called the Walking Dead Zomcast. Since season 1 of the Walking Dead, me and the co-creators of this podcast did a recap show about the Walking Dead. The Talking Dead did not start until season 2. Let's just keep that in mind as well. Okay. During early on in the run of the Walking Dead and obviously the Talking Dead, Chris Hardwick was doing a live show with his Nerdist podcast in Philadelphia. So I messaged him through something, or his people rather, and said, "Hey, big fan of you and Talking Dead and your podcast and whatnot. I'm a local Philly guy. I see you're coming to town in a couple months, and I don't know what you have planned and what's set, but maybe we can figure out a way to like have my show." And it wasn't even the Talking or my Zomcast show. It was my other show that I was doing at the time. It's like, I would love to find a way to like open for you, and like, hey, by the way, we also have like the Walking Dead in common. Long story short, like less than 48 hours later, I got a cease and desist from AMC. So I honestly, and people have called me out for having like a personal grudge against Chris Hardwick. And I think grudge is I think that's a harsh word. I don't know if I have a grudge against him. But ever since then, I've had a bad taste in my mouth about Chris Hardwick, because here's a guy who, at the time, before he got famous with the Nerdist, really like was not super successful. And yeah, he had singled out, but I don't know of anything he did after that until the Nerdist. And Chris Hardwick got famous because of a podcast. So in my eyes, Chris Hardwick is one of us. And I can't get in the mindset of being that guy and getting the level of success that Chris Hardwick did, and then basically shitting on the little guy. Like that's just not me.
Now let me play devil's advocate here just for a second. You said the email or the cease and desist came from AMC, and you said you emailed or contacted his people. Is there a possibility that he didn't see any of your email communication, and this all happened with their legal department, and it was actually AMC that did that to you?
So, and I've heard this as well. So I went through his Facebook, which I don't believe is run by Chris Hardwick. I believe it's run by assistants. So there's a possibility he didn't see it, but there's also, I think, a better possibility that he did see it. I think, and I don't know if he saw it or not. So there's a chance he didn't see it, but here's how this ties into current day Hardwick. 'Cause like, as far as that's concerned, I'm over the fact that happened, and it was more of a playful joke that I made about Chris Hardwick, having the cease and desist. Like I don't know if you watch any late night TV. I sometimes do, and one of my favorite bits that Jimmy Kimmel does is a bit about Matt Damon being on the show and then always running out of time. And on one of my podcasts, and it was right around it was maybe a year or two after this happened, I was like, oh man, let's just have some fun. Like, let's just make fun of this fact that I got a cease and desist. And we would joke that we were going to have Chris Hardwick on it was a show called That's Entertainment at the time. Oh yeah, Chris Hardwick's going to be a guest. And then we just make the joke about how we ran out of time, completely stolen from Jimmy Kimmel. So I feel like I got over it basically. but there was something that in the back of my mind always didn't sit right with that. And maybe it was just AMC's fault. Who knows? But there's something that was in Chloe Dykstra's essay about how he didn't like competition, and he got very jealous of other creative people or something along those lines.
So it rang through to your experience.
Yes. And I, despite what current day events with AMC doing the investigation, I still kind of tend to today on we're recording on July 28th. I still kind of side with the potential victim here. And I'm not saying that she's 100% accurate, but I'm not saying she's 100% wrong. And I think that it's way too convenient that his text messages leaked out after all this happened, and it paints her to be crazy and him to be basically an angel. I think the truth, much like in anything like this, lies somewhere in the middle. Maybe she embellished some of this stuff. I don't think he's perfectly innocent like he kind of painted himself out to be. And this could be this. There's zero research in this. I'll put this out here. I can't back this up by anything, but I read somewhere in a tweet, not in an official source, that the company that AMC used happens to be very friendly with the Hearst family, which Chris Hardwick is married into. So if that is true, I'm going to say my words very clearly here, because there are people that listen to the show who do not like me anymore, and we had a falling out, and they use opportunities to paint a bad picture about me and this podcast. If that is true, and that's a big if, because I don't have anything besides a tweet that tells me that, if the company AMC used is family friends with the Hearst family, I don't buy that he's necessarily officially clear on all charges. That being said, I don't have to watch a show, and I'm not going to watch a show. I'm not going to support Chris Hardwick because there are things in her essay that I know from personal experience are probably true. They might not make him be a monster, but they make him, in my opinion, not be fan friendly, I guess.
And, we were talking just a few minutes ago about, everybody has a right to their own opinion. We kind of seen Chloe's side. We kind of saw Chris's side, but there's a third side that we don't know about. And that's pretty much is the truth, the third side. Mm-hmm. So some of those things that Chloe said may be true. I'm not saying that she's wrong. I'm not saying that, she was out to get Chris or anything. I guess what I'm getting at is just, it was somebody came out with an accusation, and then immediately that next day, or hell, it might have even been the same day, he was instantly fired from everything.
Well, and so I'll actually counter that and play devil's advocate, is that he actually technically wasn't fired. He was suspended, I think, because they did. Now, NBC never said that. I don't think they said much of anything. I think they said they're investigating. They didn't even say they were pulling the wall. I don't know if they had said Chris Hardwick is fired. I may have even said that was a step too far until proper investigation was done. And coming from the guy who does not like Chris Hardwick. Mm-hmm. But I feel like the way that it was handled, I think AMC kind of did it right. They didn't fire him. They replaced him on the panels, and the way it was worded was like he kind of agreed with it. I'm sure he was forced into it, but I think that they worded it in a way, at least, where it made it sound like, okay, Chris has decided to step aside from the panels at San Diego so that the attention isn't on him, and the attention is where it should be. And I think that was the right move. And I think it was the right move to put his talking with Chris Hardwick on hold, because here's the problem with it. It was unfortunate timing for AMC, because they had this, what are they going to do? AMC was either going to be the bad guys who put on a show a guy who was painted it as to be a monster, a sex criminal, basically, or they were going to be the bad guys who fired Chris Hardwick.
Mm.
And I think by technically suspending him, in my opinion, and maybe, my opinion is not right, but in my opinion, I think they did the right thing.
Well, since you put it that way, okay, I can see that. But, we started this whole Hardwick's thing just to kind of get back to James Gunn.
Yeah. We just went on a really long tangent about Hardwick, which is something I thought I would never do on this show because despite him maybe being innocent, my personal opinion is fuck that guy.
The reason why I brought up Hardwick was because it's just instantly something comes out and the studios and everything just jump on the situation, get rid of them. And I feel they did the same thing with Gunn. This whatever host it was of whatever show that was found these tweets from 10 years ago and started throwing them up on his Twitter, Instagram feeds or whatever. And Disney was like, nope, those aren't our values. We're gone. Now, let's not forget that Disney is the company that was built on not politically correct cartoons and stuff back in the day.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's not forget that, Walt Disney.
Yeah, and like I said, that's why it took me a while to find out where I wanted to fall on the James Gunn thing, because again, I was the guy who went off about Chris Hardwick, and I think I probably at the time said like, oh, he was fired from all this stuff, but if you really kind of like go back and think about what happened, he technically wasn't. I don't think he was fired, especially since they brought him back, like they reinstated him. Where I don't think Disney's going to back down from this. Like I don't think they're going to say, oh, you know what? We jumped the gun. I think if AMC fired Kid Chris, I think they would be in a position where they couldn't bring him back because they used the terminology fired. So I think AMC, whether it's right or wrong, I think they played that card right versus Disney not playing the card right versus, you're right. Like we live. I am very supportive of the Me Too movement, and I am very supportive of believing the victim. But it is a very dangerous game that we're in, where people are being painted guilty before innocent, and it is ruining their careers.
Or not even their careers, just their name.
Yeah.
I'm a supporter of it too. I know this sounds like I'm not. The Chris Hardwick thing just kind of, I don't know. It just kind of, I felt that it was just handled really poorly, really quickly. I didn't feel like there was any time in between anything to do anything, and they just got rid of them. So that's why that's kind of sticks in my head. I am all for the victim. I am for the victim speaking up because I know there hasn't been a time where the victim was ever heard. But it is a dangerous game right now where anybody can say anything and somebody is just ruined because, that public opinion can destroy you.
Yeah. And I think it's what I take from it as a cisgender male, straight white male, is that as long as I'm good, as long as I'm being good, and obviously maybe not, maybe there is something to worry about because James Gunn didn't even do anything like as far as okay, so there was a potential that Chris Hardwick did something, and I leave it open to that there's a potential that he still did something. We don't know what that something is, because as you said, there's that third variable called the truth that no one will really know, because
Correct.
it's no one ever. The only two people that know the truth are Chloe Dykstra and Chris Hardwick, and hopefully it's leaning more towards what Chris Hardwick is saying, only for, and not necessarily for the sake of Chris Hardwick, but for the sake of this girl. It would be sad that she made it up, and maybe she needs to get help. But the things that she said are awful things that happened to her if that's what happened. So hopefully, just for the sake of I don't want these bad things to happen to her. Like, hopefully they didn't actually happen. I don't know why she would have made it up, but hopefully they didn't happen. But regardless, like, if James Gunn could be attacked for something that he said that he like, just so, and this is another great point that Mark brought up in his article, was that, you know, James Gunn was an asshole. He made these ridiculous pedophile and rape jokes, but he's not those things. Roseanne Barr was a racist. She made racist jokes. She is a racist. When someone's currently doing something, it makes that makes them that thing. She you know, made a racist comment that makes you racist. And I maybe she can plead ignorance to not knowing that was going to be a racist comment, because God knows what I said 10, 15 years ago could be constructed in that light. But again, I think that in the 15 years that Roseanne has been this controversial comedian, I don't think she's shown growth. Like, I personally feel like I've shown growth in the 10, 15 years that I've been a quote unquote humorist. And James Gunn, I think, has shown growth based off of what we see him tweet about and in the course of 10 years, and based off what people and peers say about him, you know, like here's and kind of moving away from Chris Hardwick and going to Roseanne versus James Gunn, because ultimately that's kind of what I feel this was about. Like, it was this conservative guy saying, haha, now we got one of yours. When it comes to Roseanne, I feel like it's a lot of political figures that are coming to her defense versus like collaborators and peers, where with James Gunn, it's a lot of collaborators and peers that came to his defense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know what to say about Roseanne.
It's another one that, like, I could understand someone standing up for her and saying that she shouldn't have been fired. I can understand that. But it is my belief that she hasn't shown growth. And I think that I think if I sat down and really wanted to prove that, I could probably go through her public tweets and video recordings of interviews, maybe not interviews, but like, you know, maybe more personal videos and stuff. I could probably find material that shows that she hasn't grown as a comedian. And this kind of goes back to what we said earlier about like how 10 years ago something was accepted, and it doesn't make it right, but it was accepted. And what's that reflect on our, like, George Carlin wouldn't survive as a comedian in 2018, but he's looked at, right. But he's looked at in 2018 as like the father of comedy. Like, right. Like, I'm not a comedian and I don't follow comedy hardcore. I appreciate the art, but it's to my understanding that in 2018, comedians today say, yeah, George Carlin inspired me, but they wouldn't make a George Carlin joke in 2018.
It's kind of like Mel Brooks. You won't find a movie that was made like Mel Brooks's films back in the day nowadays.
Yeah. And it's hard, like, where, and I don't think I'm the right person. I don't think you're the right. I think we're the wrong people to be trying to figure this out, because like, we are the least oppressed people in the world. You know, like I had to deal with getting beat up in high school because I liked Star Wars. You know, like I didn't have to deal with anything that is nearly as bad as what, you know, people of color and women and people who aren't straight. I didn't have to deal with any of that as a kid, and I can't imagine what they had to go through and still go through. And I think for us to comment, and I won't speak for you, for me to comment on what's acceptable as comedy is not my place, because like, again, I'm a cisgender white straight dude, like whatever the proper terminology is these days. So like, I don't know. I don't know what's like, I don't know what's, I just try to make sure my humor doesn't hurt people, and I'm hoping I'm doing a good job.
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I know I'm a white dude. I know, and I understand that, and you know, that's one of my rules I have on our site is we don't talk politics, we don't talk religion, we don't talk anything sexual, and I feel, you know, Temple of Geek has become an all-inclusive website. We accept geeks of all kinds. And I feel if we keep those three subjects out of our podcast, out of our writings, it makes for a better world. Because then there's no arguments, there's no disagreements, there's no, all we have is just the geekdom to talk about.
Yeah, and I agree with like those things are super controversial, and it's hard to have, and I don't. This is actually probably one of the episodes that's been, and I won't say we talked about any of those subjects, but we loosely floated around those areas in our conversation. I think the big issue, and I bring this up a lot when I see people like saying, and I, without getting into major political talk, like I definitely identify as a liberal, and I'm sure a conservative would say the opposite of what I'm about to say, but I tend to see conservatives say like, oh, that's a typical liberal, or, oh, this is, you wouldn't see a conservative do this. And my point whenever I see that stuff is if it finally, like there's a family friend on Facebook that posts all that stuff all the time and is a super Trump supporter, and that's whatever, like that's your, like, I don't care that people support Trump. I don't agree, but we just have a different opinion of who he is. Mm-hmm. And I try to attack it from that angle. And I think this comes from the whole trying to be positive thing. But I also, those three things that you avoid talking about, in Temple of Geeks is what I try to just avoid talking about in life, because it's so scary to even want to talk about that in life, because people can't have conversations. And a family friend, I just finally got sick and tired of feeling like I was being attacked because of how I feel politically. And so I just made a simple comment, and it didn't get nasty or anything. So I was happy that it was a positive exchange. But also every now and then when I hit a tipping point in what I'm seeing politically on social media, I do interact, because I'm an idiot, basically. I'm a big old dummy, and I open that door. But like, it comes down to this very simple nature of both conservatives and liberals don't want to talk with one another. They just want to point fingers and say that they're better than the other. If people just sit down and have a civil conversation, then you still might not agree with each other, but at least you'll have a better understanding of why they believe what they believe, and you can maybe respect it.
Oh, no, I agree with that 100%. I mean, you will never hear me engage in any type of political talk, especially on my social media.
Yeah, it is. And I try, and I'm usually pretty successful, because as someone who's liberal, like, I tend to see Facebook, like, for some reason is filled with a lot of conservative people, and I know I can control that feed, but like a lot of family friends and family, like not necessarily immediate family, but there's people that are like way conservative, and they have their reasons, and I respect that reason, and I don't agree, and I try not to comment, because people on my Facebook feed tend to be people like I actually know in real life. Like, there might be some people I don't know, but like a good majority of them, especially the ones I'm talking about, like I know and I see on a regular basis. So like, I just don't want to talk about it, because somehow, and I'll take fault, and it's hard for me to, as someone who's also kind of ignorant to politics, like I don't pay attention as much as I should. That's because I'd rather watch The Flash. It's I'm gonna get frustrated, and I know when I get frustrated, I'm gonna start being, I don't want to fucking talk about it anymore, and that's me. That's my problem. So that's why I try not to do it in Facebook or in real life, unless I know that we can have a civil conversation about it.
I tell you what, I followed politics like crazy. I mean, I used to follow it, especially during the election. I mean, I was listening to all sorts of radio programs, reading all sorts of news articles, because I wanted to make sure I was voting for the right candidate. So I was researching everybody, reading, listening, going on Twitter. I mean, I was doing it all. And I found that when you involve yourself that much into politics, you start to go crazy, and you tend to get depressed.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah. How can you?
And I was like, I need to stop this. I got to put this behind me. So occasionally I'll read something and I'll just make a comment to my wife. Wife, I don't like said subject. And then she'll be like, oh, shut up. Stop watching the news. And then, that's it. And then I go back to doing my geek thing. I can't do it anymore.
It's, and I think especially in the era we're in right now, the last, for me at least, from my perspective, the last handful of years has been super tough on people. And that's not just tough on liberals. It's been tough on all sides of it, for whatever, one reason or another. And it's just very tough waters to navigate. And I don't think there's an easy answer. And we're going to leave that the most basic of political talk that we just had on Everything is Awesome, and go back to Temple of Geeks and go back to what makes us all happy and smile. So going to Temple of Geeks, and we've covered the podcast. Did the podcast and like the written word of Temple of Geek coincide with each other, or did the website and the blog posts and the reviews and stuff come after that?
That all came afterwards. Podcast was first. I ended up having to move it off of whatever, I think it was Podomatic that I was using at the time. I can't even remember, but you had such limited space for the amount of money you were paying. And I was like, man, I'm not going to pay this each month. So I was like, I could get a website for what I'm paying here. So I ended up going and getting a website. And at first the website was just strictly for the podcast. But then I was like, well, what if we write an article about something? So we started doing movie reviews, or I think it was, no, I'm sorry. Paul started doing his casting calls. Remember back in the day when Wizard Magazine would have casting call?
Oh my God. Yeah.
So Paul would have his own version of that called Paul's Casting Calls, or whatever it was called back in the day. And he would write up this whole spiel of different movies that he would like to see and who he would cast for those parts. Then I started writing just kind of little funny articles about like my top 10 inconsistencies in the Star Wars universe, or what really grinds my gears, I think is what I called the article, and things like that. And that's what we started putting on the site. And from there, we ended up starting to have people reach out to us and was like, hey, we really like your site. It's a nice fan site and stuff. We would like to see if we could write for you. And that's how I started acquiring some of my staff. I call them staff very loosely. None of them gets paid.
Yeah.
None of us. None of us get paid. I want to make sure I'm very clear on that. Everything's volunteer work, 100% volunteer work. We do go to cons and stuff on press credentials and things like that. But for the most part, everybody's doing it out of the kindness of their heart.
Yeah. That's how I think every blog runs. Like I have been fortunate enough to being a guy who ran a podcast for the last 11 years, which meant I also had a website for the last 11 years. I wasn't real focused on the writing aspects of things. And I think part of that is just because I put too much on my plate, and I continue to put too much on my plate. But I started writing for this website called Dark Knight News, it was a dedicated Batman website reviewing Batman related comics, even if it was very loosely related to Batman, and Batman news and stuff. And that was like such a learning experience and got me back into like the idea of wanting to write for our website. And that's why That's Entertainment, basically the site that that Awesome Podcast is essentially, like, if you go to Awesome Podcast, it just redirects you to the section of Everything is Awesome on That's Entertainment. So I started writing reviews there, and yeah, I mean, I call them staff as well, and it feels dirty to call them staff because I'm like, ew, I don't pay these people. Like, they're doing this all for free.
Yeah, and I feel bad too because some of them put in some really hard work, and I wish I could just throw them a bone sometimes, but we don't have any ad revenue, we don't have anything like that. We're hopefully we'll be getting there soon, but right now we're just plugging along, trying to be as successful as we can.
Well, and I think like one of the great ways to kind of look at anything, and this is like the Everything is Awesome era, Kev, is to look at it as like, hey man, I'm just doing it and having fun with it. And if we can, and like, so for me, like, in order to try to make something of it, you have to have volunteers involved to help you, because you can't do it on your own. You simply can't. Like, for a podcast network, you can't have you be on every single show like this. I tried that 7 years ago, and I wanted to kill myself because it's so much stress and you're recording so much and you don't have a life and whatnot. And the same thing goes with writing on a website. Like, I tried doing that, writing every single article 5 days a week, and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do it. So you need the volunteers to help provide that content, and hopefully they stick with you, and hopefully you start making money somewhere because of that, and hopefully the people that stick with you, you can like end up giving like big rewards for sticking with you.
Yeah, that's always the dream. But you have some of those people that just work for you, and you see how much work. And I'm having fun. I know I'm having a blast. But is everybody that's working for me having a blast? That's the thing that I'm always concerned with, and I want to make sure that they're happy. So it's always a hard mixture, and it's always you just wish that you could do more.
Yeah, and it's like the hardest thing I have, because like our focus right now for writing is basically reviews. We haven't really done news coverage yet. It's something that I want to work towards, but like my problem is like, all right, guys, like we have these books to review this week. Don't post them any earlier than Wednesday because they don't actually release before then, and try to get your review up by Friday night. Also, I'm like 6 weeks behind on my reviews, but you go ahead and listen to me because I know how to successfully run this business. So it's such a weird spot that I find myself in. And like I have me and two other guys that are writing reviews on the website, and we just brought another guy on today. And I was like, and I wanted to wait to bring people on because I was like, well, I'm like 6 weeks behind. Like I can't like have a team of people that are going to write reviews, and I say, get it up by Friday. By the way, I'm not going to follow that rule at all. Like it's a weird situation to be in as I'm trying to like make everything grow.
I think I'm fortunate enough to actually have a lot of people that surround me that's a lot smarter than me, that's helping me run this and create this and make this grow. Yeah. So, yes, it was my brainchild, but it's because of the staff that I have that it's becoming what it is right now.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what I said, a couple minutes ago, like that you need those volunteers to help you, because when you're quote unquote in charge or you're the owner or whatever, that probably means you have a lot on your plate, because and not even necessarily from a standpoint, it's just because you're trying to create all the things. Like I'm sitting here trying to create my own podcast and run a podcast network, and then like it's like, oh my god, I have like all these ideas for a podcast that I want to do, and like somehow I'm involved in developing 7 more podcasts that I'm somehow involved with, whether it's just writing or producing or even co-hosting on. So and then it's like, oh, you know what, I want to write comic book reviews, and I want to write news, and I want to do this, and I want to do all the things. I need people to help me.
It's so funny. I just had that conversation with my second in command last night. We were chatting, and I was like, dude, I have this idea for a podcast. Check this out. And we talked about it, and we were like, she goes, okay, so when are we going to start doing this? I was like, I don't know when we're going to start doing it yet. She was like, well, we need to practice. So we're probably going to do a test run on Sunday to see if maybe this will make sense, if we can try this. But we're looking at trying to do something new to maybe engage more of our audience. So it was just a little quick idea I had, and she was just like, okay, I'm all for it, but we got to practice. So it's just funny that you're like, oh, I got a new podcast to do. It's like, I just had that conversation last night.
Well, so, and I have in 2018, while as by the time this episode of Everything Is Awesome airs, we are officially back on the That's Entertainment Podcast Network. But I don't want to get trapped in the area that I was in years ago when I tried running a network, and that was me being the host of so many different shows. It's just like, where do I find the time to talk so much? B, like, I don't want in 2018 especially, I don't want it to be the same voice, and I don't mean necessarily Kev's voice. I mean, I don't want it to be a bunch of white dudes sitting around talking. And I've come to the realization that like, in order to get people on my network, like I need to go and approach them and talk to them. And it just so happens that I know a lot of white dudes that podcast. I'm lucky in the sense that like I say this as I think as of August 1st, like it's a pretty equal mix of male and female driven hosting shows. So I'm happy that we're there, but like I want, as you said, you have a staff that's inclusive, and like the main purpose of the That's Entertainment Podcast Network is I want it to be an inclusive place that regardless of gender and race and sexual orientation. Like I want it to be a place of unique voices and a welcoming place that welcomes that as a listener and welcomes that as a host, and hopefully, give an opportunity to someone. I think I went on this spiel on your show, but give an opportunity to someone who doesn't normally get their voice heard. Like put them on the network and say, listen, talk about, as long as you're not a Nazi, you talk about whatever you want.
Or terrorist.
Yeah. I guess that's the present. I guess that's the 2018 version of Nazism is terrorism.
As long as you're not spouting hate.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's, and like I actually, I think I mentioned him on your show, Jeff Stormer, who hosts the Party of One podcast, friend of the show. He's been a guest. I've been a guest on his show. We're actually working together on a project soon. He sent me, as we're working together on this project, he sent me something that he's like, hey, this is what I include in like this form that I use to get a guest on the show. And it was basically like a specialized version for his podcast of what I just said about inclusion. Mm-hmm. And I saw that and I was like, oh my God, dude, like this is everything I've wanted to say, but didn't know how to word it because like I'm an idiot. And that's like, I asked him, I was like, can I lift this and like, just like say it in my own way? And he's like, totally, dude. And that's like kind of my big thing in running this network is like, I hate the idea of saying, okay, I have 6 shows that I want to do. Well, I'm not going to do all 6 shows until I know that there's a good balance. So like, there's like this, I have them listed on the network page of like coming soon, these shows. And hopefully I get to do them one day, but I do refuse to do a show with me hosting it about psych until I have more people on my network that represent what our country and what the world is.
No, that's awesome that you're, that's the way you feel. I mean, when we started Temple of Geek, I mean, I wanted to make sure that everybody was represented. I don't know if you ever actually browsed any of our photos and stuff, but you will see that we have, when we take pictures of cosplayers and stuff, it's not just the amazing looking women or men out there. It's the everyday person that we take photos of too. Because they deserve to have their costumes shown off. They deserve to have their moment in the limelight. So we want to make sure we include everybody when we do these things. And I just feel that's very important, especially when, you talk about geekdom. You talk about when we were kids, we used to get beat up for this crap. We couldn't share this stuff. So I want to make sure that if we're sharing it, that we're sharing it with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is a weird thing to like talk about, as we mentioned earlier. Like it's weird for as a white dude to be like, hey, let me tell you why I'm oppressed. And because like as a geek, yeah, I think we can speak to that, but that is no longer the case. Like it's hard for today's geeks to understand, like, wait, you got made fun of for this? Like, why? It's like Marvel's cool now. And so it's I think more important than ever that the nerdom, the geekdom, and the geeks of the world, like remember that at one point it wasn't that cool to like what we like, and like because I think that, going back to our conversation on Temple of Geek, the toxicity in fandom, some of that I think does purely stem from the fact that like, aside from everything we talked about in your show, like I think some of it stems from the fact that like some of these cats don't remember that like their dads, their parents that loved this stuff, they weren't allowed to openly say they loved this stuff, and they got beat up for loving this stuff. So like there's a sense of, I think, like pride that like this belongs to me because geeks rule the world. No, like it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everybody.
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
So, God, I don't know. We went on a couple different tangents. I don't know. Is there anything that you got your hands in that we haven't talked about?
Well, I mean, if you go to our site, you should pretty much see everything we do. We cover conventions, we cover cosplay, we cover, reviews. The reviews are usually like the bigger pictures that are coming out. We don't try to cover every single picture. Monica has been doing a fantastic job with fashion. I never thought in a million years I would be involved with fashion. And
Yeah.
it's one of our biggest things on our website. And Monica's doing a phenomenal job. She goes out and she gets these models. She gets clothes from vendors. She has the models fashion the clothes. She does the photography. She goes back and writes the review and posts these things, and it just come out amazing. It's
That,
awesome.
yeah, that is super. Like, and I do. It's like looking at what gets shared to social media from Temple of Geek, and just perusing the site around whenever I like it's become Temple of Geek's become one of the tabs I just leave open and like check every day. There's a handful of sites that I do that for, and it's kind of funny like seeing how that's transitioned to different sites, and I would say probably more independent sites over the years. But yeah, it is. I love that the photo cosplay stuff that you guys do, because it is stuff that you don't see every day. I know there's other sites that post daily. I don't know if daily, but they post frequently cosplaying stuff. But I feel like it is the more mainstream versus what you guys have, and that's not like a bad thing. Like I'm indie for life, so I love that it's the everyday cosplayer.
Yeah, I mean, and I just feel that the everyday cosplayer deserves to be shown off too. I mean,
Yeah.
their costumes are just as amazing as some of the other people's that are showcased online. So let's give them just a moment in the spotlight, make them feel good to see their picture on a website or see it on a social media feed somewhere. I just think that's just something that people deserve to have that moment every once in a while.
Yeah, and it is like I couldn't ever imagine that's entertainment, which is kind of like the face of everything we do. It would be I would be in your shoes of feeling we're doing fashion, like that's the one category I don't have listed anywhere on the front or the back of the site, because like I right now like the staff is as far as writers, it's all just dudes. Like we don't know, we have, at least I assume, we don't know fashion. Maybe the other guys do. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but our female podcasters may have a thing or two to say about fashion. I don't know, but um, it's maybe we'll do it one day. I don't know. It's we have to bulk up that staff to have a healthy size staff. How many people do you have writing for Temple of Geeks?
As of today, I just counted that before we got on this. There was 18 people.
Oh wow, that's
Um,
a healthy staff.
they don't all write. Several of them do podcasts. Several of them are photographers. I would say probably the writers. There's probably about maybe 8 of them, and the rest.
That's still healthy.
So, but the rest of us, they still do podcasts. They do photography, other things like that. So, it's a good mixture of people, a good mixture of staff.
Yeah, you guys are doing some great work over at Temple of Geeks, and I think I told you the other day I was going to try. Normally, I don't pre-listen to podcasts because I like to have the surprising conversation and an interesting conversation. But because I was going to be a guest, I was like, oh well, I should totally figure out what the show's about. And then like my day job has budget things, so I completely like did not listen. But don't take any offense to that, because that's normally how I do my shows. And I think that's what I was getting to in the beginning. I think like the first thing I talked about was how my fiance doesn't listen to the show, and she called me out for how I do my interviews. And that was, I was having the other Everything is Awesome guys on. And she's like, well, have you listened to the show? I was like, no, I don't listen to that. I listen after I have them on as a guest. She's like, that's rude. I'm like, you say it's rude. I think they understand. She's like, no, I think they think you're an asshole is what they think.
No, I don't think that at all. I mean, people are welcome to listen to our show if they want. If they don't want to listen to the show, more power to them. I do it because it's fun. I enjoy doing it. So, I mean, if I have no subscribers or if I have 1 million subscribers, I'm still going to do it.
That's what a great mind. That's the mindset that when I used to do podcasts under the name Steel Tip, that I was all about that listener. I was all about that number. I'd never look at my numbers now. But I am the guy that like when I have you on my show, like, and to me, we obviously, so here's where I'll compare my show and your show as far as interview style. And that's like, I have done what you've done in the past, where I have a list of questions, and I don't necessarily send them to the people, but I know what I'm going to ask, and I'm terrible at that style of interviewing. I say this, I do an interview show that I'm the worst interviewer in the world. What I am good at is I'm real good at conversation, and when that conversation is not planned, when I don't have a bullet point list in front of me to ask, because here's what I'll do. If I had, so I'm gonna open up the document you sent. We're gonna go inside baseball here, and I'm gonna open up the document that you sent me earlier.
Okay.
And I'll pick a handful of questions that if I was interviewing you, the way you interviewed me, which was fantastic, you did a great job at it. You can handle being an actual journalist, whereas I can only be a man-child. This is how I interview. So, Danniel, can you tell our audience a bit about yourself?
Man, that was an awesome way of producing that question. I like that. You changed your inflection in your voice and everything.
I told you I'm a good conversationalist. I'm a shit interviewer, but I'm a good conversationalist.
Well, a little bit about myself. I'm 39 years old. I started Temple of Geek back in 2012 with my friend Paul. Started off as a podcast, and we've been growing ever since.
That's great. Can you tell me what your favorite guest has been? And you don't answer that question. I literally didn't listen to anything you just said, and I just asked the next question that was on a list that I had prepared.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my point of saying I'm a bad interviewer, is that if I have a list in front of me, I'll ignore everything you say, and I won't have that back and forth. Whereas on Temple of Geeks, everyone has either hopefully listened to it or go listen to my guest spot on Temple of Geeks, and you'll hear two of those questions, the two questions I just asked, you'll hear on that show, and you'll hear it in a very natural way versus me being a garbage interview. But the last hour and 15 minutes where we just went on a casual conversation, and I would venture to say that maybe some of the questions that you had asked me were answered, that you answered for yourself on this show, either through me asking you. I think I asked you two questions. I legit asked you two questions that I remember asking you, and everything else was pure conversation. And to me, that makes me a good podcaster. And that's why I don't prepare. And that's why I try not to listen to anything about my guest ahead of time, if possible, because otherwise I'm going to turn into a garbage person and just ask you, here's a question, ignore what you say. Here's question two. I'm just, and then once I get to know you, and a lot of times I describe this show as like, hey man, this show is a lot like we meet at a bar, we're having a couple drinks and having our very first conversation. And I found out you do a podcast and that you write a bunch of articles, and we just have that natural conversation at a bar. That's what this show is. This is a podcast at a bar, basically, without the fun drinks.
Yeah. My problem is, and as you can tell, I don't talk a lot. But
yeah, I for the last 2 hours that we've been talking on both shows is 95% Kev.
My problem is this style of podcasting, I can do with people that I'm very comfortable with. But like complete strangers like you and me, this is the first time we're talking to each other, for the last 2.5 hours. But this is the first time that you and I have actually physically met via voice chat. So it's, I'm still trying to fill you out and all this stuff. Maybe after a couple more conversations, I could sit here and just have a whole freaking 4-hour conversation with you about Arrow or something, which we did earlier. I mean, I felt something in common with you, and I was able to go off a little bit further into detail with it. Yeah. So,
but I think that just shows like the different strengths and weaknesses of this whole podcasting game. And I think that's like, I think we're on two different spectrums of that interview style of, I just, like I said, I respect people that do the prep, because that's my weak point, and maybe I can work on it, but I don't know. I feel like I'm real strong at this, and I should keep going with this.
Yeah. I don't feel that I'm strong at that either. I mean, I do listen to the questions. I do listen to the answers, and I do try to come up with other questions while I'm talking to keep the conversation rolling. But I know I have a lot to learn. Still a long ways to grow.
Well, and I think every podcaster should always feel like they have something new to learn, or something. They should always be evolving. Otherwise, like, what's the point? Like, if you feel like you know everything, and I feel like I know a lot, and I feel like I'm good at what I do, but I know I can be better. And I feel like you should, no matter, and this doesn't really relate to just podcasting. It literally relates to anything. I don't even want to say anything creative. I think anything is, and I can leave it at that. Like, if you should always feel like you can do better. Otherwise, you're not going to excel, I think.
That's a true statement, I would believe. I mean, I could agree with that. Because you're not setting forth any goals to make yourself better.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, so you know what, Dan, you know what? We went an hour and 15 minutes and I wasn't even courteous enough to say, do you go by Dan or Daniel? I just assumed Daniel because that's what you
Daniel is what I go by.
All right, cool. Is it weird when people like, do you get offended when you get called Dan?
No, not at all. I mean,
Okay.
one of my friends call me Danny. My parents call me Danny. I have people at work that call me Dan. It's just, I go by Daniel though, but it doesn't offend me.
It's funny because you asked me that question. I was like, yeah, whatever. Because I honestly don't care. 10, 15 years ago, it was like, oh, dude, I'm Kev. I don't go by anything but Kev. And that was just me being like a douche 20-year-old. But but even in my, like now, I generally, whenever I talk about myself, I say Kev. And most of like my close friends call me Kev because like they've known me for almost 30 years at this point. But generally, like, I mean, as you can see on Twitter, it says Kevin Gallagher. I think that I've changed the iTunes feed to say Kevin Gallagher, and like everything that you see on the internet is generally Kevin Gallagher or Kevin M. Gallagher Jr.
Yeah, you made it look really official when you threw the M and the junior part in there.
Oh yeah. Oh, I make it look, because you know what? Now I dare you to Google Kevin M. Gallagher Jr. And I'm almost positive every result on the first page of Google is me now. When you Google Kevin M. Gallagher Jr.
I'm going to go back and make sure everything is Daniel R. Slade the 14th.
Yeah. You know what? We didn't even. I wanted to comment on that. You have the most badass last name of Slade. Because as soon as I saw that, I was like, holy shit, he's Deathstroke.
Yeah, I was laughing. I was just in Mississippi last week for a job that I'm currently working at. And I was doing some training down there. And I stopped at the local GameStop because I was looking for some action figures. I'm a big action figure collector. And when I was in there, you know, he ran my debit card and he was like, Danniel Slade, here you go. And his wife, I guess, or a girlfriend or whatever was in the store. She was like, Slade? Like that Deathstroke character? I'm like, yeah, that's my last name. She's like, that's your real last name? I'm like, yeah, that's my real last name. She's like, that is so awesome. I'm like, thanks.
And I think what I'm taking away from this story is how awesome is it in 2018 that someone goes like Slade Wilson? Like that, the fact that Slade Wilson / Deathstroke is mainstream, that someone's girlfriend or fiance or wife or whatever was able to pick up on it. That is a geek world that I want to live in.
It is pretty impressive. I mean, that and the name Thanos. Really?
Yeah. What I get is like the watermelon guy. I'm like, yes, for Christ's sake, the watermelon guy. I've got that for 33 years. Can we forget that Gallagher exists?
I just caught what you were saying. The guy who smashes watermelon for his comedy bits.
Yeah, like he's. I don't even think. Like, is he alive? I think he is alive. But like, that's my question. Like, I don't even think he's alive. Every now and then, I also get the. Is it HBO Showtime? I get that Shameless show. They're like, oh, like the Gallagher family and Shameless. I'm like, oh, now there's something else I have to contend with. Please, no. I like the. How about this? I like me. Gallagher, like me, the original Kevin Michael Gallagher Jr., the most common name in the world. Well, Irish world.
Yeah, Slade is my family surname.
That's badass. That is, and it's even more badass because like it is like maybe not. Maybe this is the way I feel. Maybe you feel the way I feel about Gallagher, the Watermelon Smasher. But like I think it's awesome that like people will be like, Deathstroke, that's badass, man.
Yeah, it's just the first name that doesn't go with it because my first name is I go by Daniel. It's spelled with two N's. It's actually pronounced Danniel. So
okay, yeah, because I did notice that it's not spelled like any other Daniel I know. So
there's actually like a real pronunciation of my name as Danniel. That's how you really say my name. But I never go by that because people are like Danielle or something else, and I'm just like it's Daniel. Just
it's just fucking Daniel. So is that like Like what culture does that
I
come
have
from?
no idea. I always tell everybody when they're like, "Well, that's unique." I'm like, "Yeah, my parents were hippies and smoked a lot of drugs."
So does your immediate family call you
Nope.
Danniel?
I didn't even find out that that was the wrong spelling of my name until I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, because there was never any other Daniels in the class with me. And
Oh, that's
my
weird.
teachers never pointed that out, that, oh, hey, your name has two N's in it. It was when I came to Texas and there was another Daniel in the class with me. I noticed that his name was missing an N. And I was like, dude, what's wrong with you? Can your parents not spell? And they're like, well, he's like, what are you talking about? And, I found out that my name was actually Danil. And I was like, why did you keep this from me for like 7 years?
It's funny. I've never actually met another Kevin that spells it weird, but there are like people have been like, they've asked me like, how do you spell Kevin? I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? How do I spell Kevin? Like Kev in. And they're like, yeah, but like there's people that spell it with an E. I'm like, what? 2 E's? Like you don't spell Kevin Keven. And there's apparently there's motherfuckers out there that spell Kevin with a second E, and I don't get it.
Kevin with a C. C-E-V-E-N.
It blows my mind that like, and I guess it's not popular because again, I've met plenty, like I grew up in a school where there was like 3 other Kevins, and probably 2 other Gallaghers, but like there was never the Keven. And it's that's weird. It's a weird thing. I've also gotten Gallagher with like, how do you spell and that I understand because like Gallagher, there are in Ireland, I believe there are Gallaghers that spell it without the I think it's without the H. And I think there's like a way to spell it with
An A. Gallagher.
Yeah, there's like, I don't know, there's a couple different ways to spell Gallagher, especially if you're in Ireland, but I feel like mine's I think my version of how Gallagher is spelled. I think literally Kevin Gallagher in Ireland is pretty much John Smith.
It makes it hard when you're a kid though, and you can't find like a license plate or a vanity plate or anything with your name on it. So
yeah, as far as first name was concerned, I did not have that problem. Now my son has that problem because he knows that he's Kevin Gallagher the third, but like he also knows that he goes by Trey. Like he hasn't asked. He's 6, going on 7, 6.5. He hasn't like. I'm waiting for the day he's like, fuck you, Dad. I'm Kev. I'm like, wait. Like, no. You're. It's gonna be weird because the only reason I agreed to name him after me and my father is because I didn't have to call him Kev or Kevin. Like I was sold on the fact that we could call him Trey. So I'm waiting for the day that he defies me.
It will happen. All kids defy their parents.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I feel good now. We got away from serious interview talk and we went on another tangent, and I feel like that we can appropriately end the show on that note. So before we officially go, Danniel, can you give everyone your plugs, where they can find you, Temple of Geeks, and all that fun stuff?
Temple of Geek website proper can be found at templeofgeek.com, spelled exactly how it sounds, Temple of Geek. Podcasts can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Just type in Temple of Geek and you'll see our 3 shows. And then social media, if you're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, just search Temple of Geek. We own that handle. So we're not hard to find. Just use the word Temple of Geek everywhere and you'll find us.
And just like you kind of asked me, I don't normally ask my guests this, but I'm stealing this question. Are there any projects that you can officially talk about? The other one is a maybe. The one that you mentioned is kind of a maybe, sort of, but I want some juicy projects if you have any.
I don't think there's anything juicy coming up. We're getting ready to attend a bunch of cons. Convention season's like in full swing now. So like here in about 6 hours, I'll be at Classic Game Fest.
Nice.
And there's a couple other cons coming up, so we'll be posting up full reviews and cosplay and everything else from those conventions there. Nothing really deep, dark, secret dives projects coming up along that's official yet. We're still in the planning stages for a couple things. We're hoping to get some of these finalized so we can start having some new features on the website and getting more people to engage with us.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter that you guys were at least a couple days ago looking for more writers. Is that something you're still looking for?
At the moment, I think we got our fill for everybody that came in.
All right, so don't pay attention to that, guys. You can't write. Wait your turn.
No, we got a really good a good pool of people that messaged all of us, and it took us pretty much a day and a half to reply to everybody. But we,
damn, I wish I would get responses when I say, "Hey, come work for me for free."
But we got a pretty good pull out of the people, and I'm looking forward to working with them and seeing what they got, and hoping to share their visions and stuff to the world too now.
Very, very cool. Well, Danniel, thanks for doing the show. Everyone, check out Temple of Geeks. All the links and places that you can find Temple of Geeks are going to be in the show notes. So if you already forget, I don't know how you forget Temple of Geeks because it's pretty easy. But if you forget it, it's all the links are going to be in the show notes. Danniel, thanks for doing the show.
I appreciate you having me.
All right, guys. Thanks once again to Danniel Slade for being on the show. Check out Temple of Geek at templeofgeek.com, on Twitter at Temple of Geek, and be sure to listen to their podcast. Guess what, guys? I was a guest on that show. Check out episode 131 and hear me talk to Danniel about fandoms and myself, of course. Do you need another show to listen to? Hey, how about you check out Victims of Villains? They talk nerd, they talk hope. It's the podcast that uses pop culture to raise awareness for suicide and to bring hope to those in need. Hey, super friends, in October we'll be launching 2 new shows. That's right, 2 shows. First, we're launching After Party of One, where I sit down with people in the tabletop role-playing games community to discuss recent episodes of Jeff Stormer's Party of One podcast. And then at the end of the month, we're going to be launching Black Squadron Radio, a Star Wars podcast where we sit down and cover news and all kinds of different topics within the world of Star Wars. We like to end Everything is Awesome with a call to action. Super friends, there are a lot of terrible things happening right now, and it can feel like you can't do anything to help, but you can. It takes people like us to make a difference, and one of the easiest and most important ways to take action is to call your representatives about issues that are important to you. Super friends, with November coming up, there is no greater issue than making sure you are eligible to vote. Head on over to vote.org to check to see if you're eligible to vote today. When I call my reps, I use a site called 5calls.org. That's the number 5calls.org. There, you'll find issue summaries of issues that are important to you, contact info for your representatives, and a script to read while you're on the phone to make sure your message gets across. Calling is quick, easy, and is one of the most important ways to have your voice heard. It can make a tremendous difference. Let your voice be heard. Thank you to our supporters on patreon.com/thatentertains. If you want to support us in a non-monetary way, word of mouth recommendations and 5-star rating reviews on iTunes are the best way to spread the good word of awesome. You can find us on @RealAwesomePod on Facebook.com and Twitter. You can also find us on Instagram @AwesomePodcast, and we're available on awesomepodcast.com and of course thatentertains.com/network. You can get more news about this show at awesomepodcast.com and thatentertains.com, but also on my personal Twitter @ThatNerdKev is where I do a lot of things. If you're interested in ad rates, live appearances, help with your podcast, or have a question or comment, email us at awesome@crudehammerstudios.com. Everything is Awesome is a production of That Entertains Podcast Network in association with Crude Hammer Studios. Crude Hammer Studios is a Philadelphia-based production company specializing in audio. You can find more information at crudehammerstudios.com. Thanks for listening, super friends. We've been awesome.
That's Entertainment Podcast Network. Entertainment and culture. Artist-owned, fan-supported.